as we're closing up the morning session, I'm going to invite my colleague Jade Martin to hop on. And she's going to give us just a brief roundup of everything that we've heard this morning. And also she's going to reflect on some of the formations of this network as we go forward into the afternoon session and beyond. So Jade, if you would like to join us, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jade Martin, as you already know. I'm the other treasurer in the funding branch of the network. My specialism is science fiction, but I'm here today to give you a brief roundup of the morning events and describe how all of the committee kind of realised the connections between their work. For those of you who haven't attended both events this morning, I'm just going to highlight a few key moments. So Professor Catherine Rottenberg gave a fantastic talk on neoliberalism. She noted that neoliberal feminism brings the rhetoric of balance into play to align motherhood into the realm of the managerial, how it has co-opted aspirational middle-class women and maintains care, work and reproduction as something that can only be shouldered by women. But the optimistic future is that it has spurred a renaissance in feminist direct action. We have just experienced our approaches to jazz panel. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to skip my little roundup of that. Again, I just want to thank both our speakers and our viewers for being present today. I hope it really sparks some interesting conversations. If we're lucky, we'll get some member collaboration and ideas for future events with us. Before we break for lunch, I would like to pick up from where our lovely directors left off this morning. We noted earlier that we all met down to discuss how projects overlapped due to our interest in popular culture. It might be helpful to outline some of these conversations so that our members can think about their own projects in these terms. We all agree that genre fiction is often porous because it has its roots in popular culture, which itself is a continually shifting and diversifying composite of various different elements. So to further describe the ways in which our network became interested in popular culture, we have got some of these early connections for you now. For example, as a science fiction scholar, I noticed that many science fiction texts include elements of the Gothic and horror. If we think of Alien the movie, we have the monster alien of the xenomorph, the dark and eerie corridor shots of the spaceship, which is a parallel to Victorian secret passageways and castle corridors. And then we have the body horror that comes from the violent chestburster scenes. Both Georgie and Dan have discussed how Scream combines both the Gothic and the horror genre. The Mask of the Killer parodies the image of the ghost. He then goes running after young girls who fit the contemporary Hollywood standard of feminine beauty, a very interesting parallel to the Castle of Otranto, canonically discussed as one of the first Gothic texts. Some of our researchers even trace a direct line from the Gothic into the horror as literature, cinema, and television continue to blossom into the 20th century. Rhys Jenkins has commented on how the weird fiction took hold during the zine era, which is the early 20th century, alongside prolific publications from the early small press culture. Weird fiction plays on humanity's disgust in the evolutionary possibilities of the natural world to evoke both terror and awe. It exists in a liminal space between science fiction and the Gothic, drawing influence from both, and yet adding tropes and devices that feel unnerving to the reader. Therefore, it is a space between both these genres where the natural and ancient are made to seem unnatural and limitless. Georgie has noted that the Gothic mythology has often surrounded sex and seduction, and that informs the background of any contemporary representation of the vampire. In addition to the dark sexualization of Gothic figures, Gothic and Romance media have historically conversed with, as well as being similarly repulsed by, each other's conventions. Their hybridity is both a historical and a contemporary one. For example, if we clean up those saucy origin stories of the vampire, you get the charming Edward Cullen and co., star of the immensely popular Twilight series. One area that has been repeatedly studied between the Gothic and science fiction is the representation of the other, with the capital O, and it is a common site for analysis. Critics focus on examining the repercussions of the social attitudes that inform such representations. Similarly, satire of these genres can take these representations of the other and mock the bigoted social attitudes that lay behind them. As Lucy has noted, romance also takes a foray into both science fiction and fantasy genres. Romance is diverse and has an immense amount of plasticity. Romance usually intersects with love stories that defy the cosmos or erotica that takes place against the backdrop of a new or different world born of the author's skill in world building. Who wouldn't feel a rush of excitement what comes with lasers, cyborgs, and new digital technologies? This might also be a trait that only science fiction scholars studies would agree with. In conversation with Georgie, I noticed that fantasy, despite seeming like the antithesis of science fiction, is often actually called its sister genre. Many authors that are well-versed in fantasy and the magical genre often pen science fiction novels too. Two huge figures that work in this field are Nalo Hopkinson and Ursula Le Guin. In the mashup between fantasy and romance, Lucy noted that in young adult fiction, the romance often focuses on the female protagonist who navigates relationships against a fantastical backdrop. There are also queer romance novels that occupy fantasy spaces. The focus on the love between two male protagonists in some texts functions against the background conventions of fantasy. Despite rarely having any fantastical creatures, a lot of fantasy conventions are explored, such as military prowess and warring kingdoms. Finally, there is the interaction of satire with all of the aforementioned genres. With all its self-awareness of its prescriptive conventions, genre doesn't always take itself so seriously. Although multiple critics disregard popular culture as something that lacks aesthetic value, part of its beauty is its self-reflexivity, and to some extent, that makes these fictions truly most postmodern in contemporary terms. For instance, Georgie and Dan have noted that there have been many mock movies of Scream, most obviously the Scary Movie franchise. However, it is notable for mocking numerous genres alongside the horror, such as science fiction films like Signs and War of the Worlds. And Lucy thought about how romantic satires, such as Isn't It Romantic, never ceases to amuse audiences. Our resident researcher of middlebrow fiction, Daniel Buckingham, is currently analysing romance and detective fiction as sites of satirical mock forms. Another example is that of the Gothic, which famously misappropriated tropes of both tragedy and comedy in its early drama and fiction. It now continues to have an interest in poking fun of itself. Zombieland, The Addams Family, and Dark Shadows are just 3 examples of this. And finally, Gothic aesthetics have often been used to create political satire, and similarly, science fiction has a tendency to mock itself, usually choosing work from early canonical writers, most notably Aldous Huxley and H.G. Wells. There are so many other connections that can be made. Most of us study genre fiction, as you probably know by now, and there is so much more to popular culture than that. I hope this short summary gives you a taste of all the ways in which we, as a committee of only 7 people, have found connections between our various specialisms. All of us on the committee hope to bring more members together to discuss the ever-widening range of popular cultures. Perhaps you'll find some unlikely connections with other scholars here today. As we end, I just want to draw your attention to the section of our website that allows for these discussions to be picked up in further detail. Currently, we have 4 written academic posts available. These focus on the digital representation of Birmingham and how it has motivated one of our members for their PhD. We have the genre of the weird and its interest in classical studies, a whistle-stop tour through science fiction and the Gothic, horror, and romance genres, and a PhD's insight into how satire can be both comedic but bigoted. I wanted to remind you that you can sign up as a member on the Midlands Network of Popular Culture and our website. Once you're a member, you can then contact us via email and add to our blog. Coming up next, we have our afternoon keynote address, Mining Bestsellers, Digging Around in Amazon with Professor Lisa Fletcher, chaired by Lucy. Then we have our industry panel, Digital Environments in the 21st Century Visual Media, featuring Lauren Ash, Vincenzo Bukowski, and Claudia Kowalczuk. This panel is chaired by Rhys Jenkins, followed by closing remarks from Daniel and Georgina. Thank you for listening. I hope everyone has a wonderful lunch. We'll meet you back here at 2 p.m.